So this week we invited your questions, and we call these types of messages a question and response rather than a question and answer, because, answers are something that, as we've been talking about today, they come through life rather than something that someone can simply say. And sometimes our answers are so unique to us that in many ways, hearing the perspective and alternate perspectives, I was thinking about this week, in some ways it's questions and more questions, because every question that you ask for me just raises more questions and more lines of thinking. So it's just an opportunity for us to respond to things that are on your heart, things that you're curious about, things that matter to you. So you submitted your questions. We have them here. We're also even going to have a little bit of a different subset of questions than we had for first service. So it's very, we're in the moment, we're spontaneous, we're flowing. Guitars are failing, all kinds of awesome stuff is happening, and we are just living, we're alive. So I also wanted to invite Victor to join me for this question and answer, or question and response rather, because Victor has just an amazing approach to life, creativity, spirituality, and he has many decades of both a career and a spiritual path that I think just offers a really a lens that I don't. And so I'm excited for us to have this back and forth. I thought maybe for folks who don't know you as well, if you could just briefly share kind of what is your lens, what is your perspective, what is some of the filtering that we're going to get some of these answers through, and just some of what your story has been to get you to that point.
Well, last session, Jake reminded me that I didn't really say anything about my credentials, and I've taught psychology and chemistry at the college level, and I started a group called Global Chant 30 years ago that is still going strong in Tucson. But the truth, if I had to say who I am, I believe that I am a lover at heart, and I just follow love wherever it takes me. It took me into academia because, we were just having this conversation. I love being on a campus. If I could throw out the students and just hang out there myself, I would do that, man. It's a great time, You've got libraries and films and music and all kinds of wonderful things. So that's what I love, but I also I love ideas, and I'm in love with love, and I believe that love is my practice in this life.
Beautiful. I'm going to start with your questions. Here we go. For me, this person writes, music especially is incredibly spiritual and such an integral part of Aldea too. I think looking more into the depth and spirituality of art would be really exciting. I'm going to put this to Victor right away, and I think, he's pretty excited about this one.
Well, I devoted 3 decades of my life to writing a book called Deep Creativity, and it really is about this question about, creativity in art and music as a spiritual practice. It's about where the interface of consciousness and creativity lies, and especially those profound moments of creative inspiration that move the world. I mean, whether it comes in various fields of art, literature, innovation, engineering, sciences, philosophy, those moments of inspiration have shaped our lives. And I wanted to know as much as I could about how people get there. And I spent 3 decades of my life interviewing creative people in different fields, collecting archival research. And if I had to boil down what I found is that creative inspiration, we think of it as a lightning bolt that hits you when you least expect it, and there's some truth to that. But there are some people in the world who put themselves in sort of the line of fire of those lightning bolts. And the practice to putting yourself in there, again, it always comes down to love. These great artists, thinkers, innovators, groundbreaking theorists, they all have this one thing in common, which is they are passionate about what they do. It takes 10,000 hours to develop mastery of something. How do you devote 10,000 hours of your life to it? That's, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year for 5 years. So it's a major commitment. Well, I'll tell you how. You love the heck out of this pursuit. You know, I've loved music since I was a little boy. When I was 3 years old, Mahalia Jackson would come on and sing gospel songs on the TV at 5 minutes to noon every weekday, and my mom can vouch for this. I had to be in front of that every day to hear Mahalia sing. And so the passion of that, it is a practice to open your heart to desire and passion and pleasure and all of the things that come with a love relationship to someone or something. And in this case, it's art. So I'm going to read one of my favorite quotes on this topic by a Russian painter named Ilya Repin. And he said, "As in my early youth, I still love the universe, love truth, love goodness and beauty as the most precious gifts of life, and especially love art. I love art more than virtue, more than people, more than family, more than friends, more than any happiness or joy in life. I love it secretly, jealously, as an old drunkard, incurably." And we don't always reach that level of passion in our lives, but these people do.
Mic drop. I would just say, too, that you talk about inspiration. I think that inspiration happens for the artist, and it also happens for people who are experiencing and enjoying the art. The root word for inspiration, the root word for aspire, and the root word for respirate, it's all the same root as the word for spirit. So it's all spirit. So to breathe is to breathe the spirit. To be inspired is to breathe in the spirit. So the ancient Greeks, where these words come from, they all kind of saw breath, inspiration, the divine, all as orbiting around the same thing. This next question, how do you see or experience the relationship between the inner work we do on ourselves, such as parts work, being more present, purpose work, etc., and how that relates to the universe, the divine, a higher power, or however people see that? How is personal growth relevant to spirituality? Has anyone found that if you go to a bookstore, the self-help section and the spirituality section are either right next to each other or they've been merged into one section? There is a connection there. And it's interesting because I was reminded of this quote from, I believe, 13th century Christian mystic Meister Eckhart, who, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along the lines of, God or the divine is not found through a process of addition, but subtraction. And so it's often that in our journeys, we encounter the divine spark within. We encounter that inner light, that love within, often through working with the things that might be obstacles or blocks in our own heart. Rumi said something similar, like, rid yourself of all the obstacles to love. And so I find that personal work, self-help, therapy, all that inner growth stuff, it actually helps us identify, figure out what might be inhibiting love and light to move through us. And when we do that work, when we find these parts of ourselves to extend more compassion to, or these things that are acting as blockages, when we can start to work with that more, which is that inner work, it actually opens us up and reveals the whole, the greater, that which is beyond us moving through us.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I would just add to that in the field of psychology, one of my great sources of inspiration is Abraham Maslow. And you probably, if you took an intro psych class, you probably encountered his hierarchy of needs. And what he said that motivation, sources of motivation, go from basic ones to higher ones. And he said that the highest motivation is self-actualization. Self-actualization is realizing our fullest potential as human beings. And he compared that to an acorn developing into a giant, beautiful oak tree. What is our oak tree? What is the culmination of our own development and evolution? Well, towards the end of his life, he added a top layer above self-actualization to his pyramid. And that level is self-transcendence. Because what he found in studying people who are self-actualizing for a lifetime is that the closer they come to the end of their lives, they realize that the true freedom lies not necessarily in simply actualizing ourselves, but in transcending ourselves, including our minds, our thoughts, our limitations, our assumptions about the world, and our attachments. And so, to me, that's why those two things, self-help and self-improvement and self-transcendence are really connected. It may turn out that if you pursue a self-improvement path, that eventually takes you to transcending yourself.
I have a couple questions here that kind of circle a similar topic, so we're going to address them at the same time. First is this: what does it look like for one to develop their own eclectic spiritual practice and maintain discipline without subscribing to any institutional checklist? And the other is this: how can those of us who were once very religious build a spiritual practice involving elements that still ring true without winding up in the same box, reclaiming some of that faith tradition while not falling susceptible to the dogma of it? So, what do you got for us?
So, there's clearly a religious impulse. Yesterday I did a little chat GPT. I asked chat GPT, what is spirituality? And it said, a sense of connection to something greater. And I think we all know that there is something greater, whether it's out there within ourselves, and we're seeking to connect to it. To me, what we call spirituality has these two components. One is transcendence, which I already talked about, and the other is communion. It's a connection to that something greater, whatever it is. And if you ask me what that is, I will say there's a transcendent mystery that connects us all. It's the ground level of our experience. It's the common link that connects us to one another. As somebody who spent a career studying consciousness, I feel that consciousness is singular. It's a little bit of a controversial idea in our society, but in Buddhist culture it's not. There's one consciousness in multiple minds. They use the analogy of the consciousness being the sky and the mind being the clouds that float across the sky. And I feel that we are perfectly aligned with connecting with a new way of being spiritual in the world right here, because the mission of this community is love, period. It's saying whatever you're looking for in spiritual life, whatever it is, it always comes down to love. And the beauty about love as a practice is other people can give you some ideas, but it's your own. You know what it's like to be in love, to be so in love that you lose yourself in the other person, where you don't know where you end and the beloved begins, where you say, you and I are one, beloved. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. Well, boom, you're talking about a spiritual path, because it has the elements of transcendence. Because when I give myself to love, I don't exist as a separate entity in the world. And it's also communion, because when you and I are one, beloved, who are we? I'll tell you right now, it's not you and it's not me. It's the underlying ground of experience, the transcendent mystery. I've called it many things in all my writings, including nature and the one, the I am that I am. It's the idea that there's a singular consciousness that's connecting us all. Recently I talked in this congregation, this community, about panholism, which is the idea that's coming from physicists, not mystics, that the underlying ground of reality is undivided wholeness and flowing movement, and that undivided wholeness abides in everything equally at every level. That means we have to recognize that whatever we call holy, holy and whole are the same root, abides in everyone and everything at every level. And when we get to that point, it's revolutionary. It changes everything.
Thank you. People often create a version of a spiritual leader that no human being could actually, you know what? Hold on. I wanted to respond to the other question. I got ahead of myself. There's the thing. I spent this week, and instead in an iPad world, I went old school note cards, like a TV show, like a late night host. I just want a little recognition for that, by the way, because I get to do this. It's fun. But then these note cards, I got too excited, and then so going back a little bit, I do want to just also remark, because the person who asked this question about religion, they talk a little bit about, well, there's two questions, and they talk about institutional checklists, and they talk about the boxes, right? And you think about this idea that there are, especially in that type of organized religion that a lot of us maybe came from, there are these ideas of these walls and boxes that hold things out and they hold things in. And in my mind, the kind of motivating energy of that kind of box is fear. Fear of new ideas, fear of people that are different. So stay within the box and keep things outside of the box, essentially. And we often talk about fear as the counterpoint to love. So if you're trying to build your own spirituality and your own diverse, eclectic set of spiritual practices, just follow the love and recognize when fear is the dominant energy versus love being the dominant energy. All right, now we can move on. Next question. People often create a version of a spiritual leader that no human being could actually live up to. They project their longing for certainty, safety, or God onto that person, and then expect them to carry the weight of perfection. What is it like dealing with the hero complex people in communities like this often put on the leader, usually unconsciously? What are your thoughts on the dangers of the hero complex and how damaging it can be for both the leader and the people? There's this great book by a Jungian psychoanalyst named Robert Johnson. The book is called Inner Gold. And the concept of inner gold is that you and I all have this incredible, limitless potential within us. As Victor is talking about, the divine, this infinite love, this consciousness, we all have it. So we're all awesome, basically. And yet part of our natural development as human beings is not to be able to recognize that right away. That in part of our growth and development, we aren't necessarily able to fully live into the fullness of our potential. It's just part of our growth, and that's okay. So what we do is we project it out onto others first. And we essentially allow them to hold our gold, or we project divinity onto them. Now, this can kind of play into what our culture often does with hero worship, celebrity worship, or even in spirituality, there's sort of this guru culture that, well, this person has that thing that I need. And so if I can be near them, if I can, essentially, if some of it rubs off on me, maybe I can experience some of it, but it's really in this individual. And what Robert Johnson basically says in Inner Gold is that the greatest thing that this person can do for you, guru, teacher, whatever you think of them as, is actually break that spell and remind you that you have everything you need. Maybe even the greatest thing they could do for you is fail you so you realize that they're human. And basically what then happens is it gets returned to you. I think in many ways this is what Jesus was really doing. He said things like, the kingdom of heaven is within you. He said things like, you will do greater things than me. So in many ways, he was more so speaking about our potential as human beings than simply focusing on who he was. One of my favorite teachers, Rob Bell, he says something like, the guru's role is to remind us that we don't need a guru. So there's a paradox inherent to all of this. And so when this person asks, what are the dangers of the hero complex and how damaging it can be, I think the greatest danger is us as individuals not getting to live into our full potential by outsourcing it to another.
Oh, totally well said. And we know about the guru trip. Somebody puts the guru on the pedestal and the guru says, sounds good to me, And the thing about the word guru is what it really means is inner teacher. So the external guru is a reflection of somebody who's been with us from the beginning of time. Primordial awareness. I say this blessing every day that's about the primordial awareness that lives in us. And so the Buddhists have this saying, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. You've probably heard that. You go, well, Now, I personally don't think it's the nicest way to treat a Buddha. But the point is that if the Buddha is out there, because the Buddha is the awakened one, instead of in here, it's a false Buddha. What's happened in our society is we've been looking for 2,000 years at least to some outside authority to rather than an internal one. And so, Jesus drew the attention of his disciples to the 82nd Psalm, which says, "You are all gods and children of the Most High." So similar to the kingdom of heaven message, what Jesus is saying is, that which you're seeking outside of yourself is inside of you and has always been and will always be. And so if we're quote unquote leaders, facilitators, mentors, our job is to offer facilitation to you, to your personal experience, but not to impose our own on you. You have to find your own way. And what's really cool in a community, especially that's devoted to love, period, is if your practice in life becomes love, however you interpret and experience it, and you're interacting with a group of people who are doing the same practice, then your interactions with one another becomes love play of the lover and the beloved of the universe. And so it becomes a very sacred a task and an experience that we share.
Can God be found in both piercing awareness and a complete lack of self-awareness? On one hand, there are those who seek transcendent out-of-body experiences. In these instances, one communes with the divine by simply being, but on the other hand, in some circles, navigating spirituality means becoming keenly aware of our transient states and the world around us. Thich Nhat Hanh advocated for mindfulness. He said, "When I drink a glass of water, I invest 100% of myself in drinking it." How do we reconcile these two disparate paths? And I think what this person is asking is, how do we both have this type of mindfulness where we're very aware of what is happening and being in the moment, and there's also this sort of potentially other way of doing things, which is more the mystical experiences or the altered or ecstatic states where we kind of, quote unquote, maybe lose ourselves. So are these different? Are they one and the same? What do you think?
I think that mindfulness is one of the most poorly named things in all of human experience, because it's about getting out of your mind. His mind is incredible. There's a famous line, which I think I quoted last time I was here, the mind is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. And so there's a reason why so many of the world's spiritual practices are focused on transcending the mind, because the mind focuses on distinctions. I'm a cognitive psychologist. That's what the mind is. We form mental representations, which are we break apart things that are a continuum into parts and pieces. Time doesn't exist. It's a continuum of now. Space doesn't exist except as a continuum of here. Self may not exist except as a continuum of consciousness. And so the heart, what I call the heart, which is our emotional center, not necessarily our physical heart, is about experiencing connectedness at its fullest. We have these bodies. We are these bodies. And these bodies sense and feel. And when we get out of our heads, we can be fully present in this body. And it can be not only a transcendent experience, as I've said before, but also an experience of communion. But it's about breaking free of the pattern of thoughts, assumptions, beliefs, attitudes, attachments that are holding us back. Even our idea of God is limiting our experience of whatever that concept is supposed to represent.
I was thinking about that word, just as you thought critically about that word mindfulness. I was thinking about what is the opposite of mindfulness? Maybe mindlessness. And I was thinking, what are some mindless things that I do? If I'm scrolling on my phone, looking through just whatever, right? the endless kind of feed of 10-second videos, because that's all we have the attention span for nowadays. That's mindlessness in my experience, and I experience that all the time. And that kind of mindlessness, from my perspective, is very different from an experience of losing myself or experience of feeling like lost in doing something. So I don't, as this question kind of states, I don't think that feeling totally abandoned to something in some kind of ecstatic or mystical or transcendent state, I don't think it is the opposite of mindfulness. I think the opposite of mindfulness is just lack of awareness, lack of connectedness.
I agree.
What is Aldea's perspective, or Victor's perspective,
That can be yours.
on prayer and or contemplative prayer in the Christian tradition? I'll honestly just say my perspective, because one thing I love about this community is that there is a diversity of perspectives welcome here, and prayer is certainly an example of something where there can be a diversity of perspective. I defined like agnosticism or being agnostic about something as simply being willing to say, I don't know, I'm unsure, and so I'm going to operate from just uncertainty. So I would say that I'm agnostic about what prayer is doing in regards to things outside of myself. I don't know, and I'm okay with not knowing. But I feel fairly certain that prayer does change something within me. Kierkegaard once said something along those lines. He said, maybe prayer doesn't do anything, it doesn't change the mind of God. Maybe it changes the mind of the one who prays. So I like that. I like this idea of taking time to contemplate and to realize what matters to me. What am I feeling? Prayer can often really connect us with what we desire, what we hope for. And so, I encourage it as a spiritual practice. But I was also reminded of this great quote by, believe it's a Catholic priest, James Finley, who some people might know of, and he says something like, God protects me from nothing and sustains me in everything. And so for me, it's this idea that maybe prayer is a shift away from this idea of a deity that's simply going to protect you from all the things you need protecting from, and more a divinity revealed in all things. And so prayer could be an opportunity to connect with that which is already present.
And my personal approach to prayer has been chanting. And because if you're going to pray, you might as well set it to music. And if you can dance to it, it's even better. And if you can dance naked under the full moon to it, I highly recommend it. Okay? And that's the thing, some of this approach to prayer is kind of gets a little sterile. Because, if you see how the mystics prayed, first of all, the shaman, some of you have my book, The Chanter's Guide, the shaman that I apprenticed with used to say, fake it till you make it. And so the nature of the chants that I chant are a manifestation, are manifestation of the reality I want to live in. Feel the love. We love being alive. We are beautiful and graceful and vital and perfect. We are whole and we are home. That's what we chanted this morning. Why? Because that's the kind of prayer I want to say. I don't want to be a beggar to a God that sits outside of me. I want to be resonating with that divine essence that is abiding in me. And I want to connect with it in you. And so that's, to me, what prayer is supposed to be. And it should be passionate. It shouldn't be a sterile act.
Is there any room for atheism at Aldea? This community seems to value love, connection, healing, and growth, which doesn't necessarily require belief in a higher power. It seems like an atheist would feel right at home here, but if pure atheism is accepted at Aldea, might some members of the community feel confused as they believe in a spiritual dimension? And if atheism is not accepted at Aldea, can you really claim to be an inclusive and diverse space? Well, yeah. I actually, yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. I'll start. Well, the first thing I'd say is that we often use the language that here in this community, values come before beliefs. Your beliefs matter. They're important. They're important to you. But values are something that we can all really connect over. And I think beliefs are transient, beliefs are subjective, beliefs are abstract. Values can be embodied and lived. The Stoic Epictetus said, don't talk about your philosophy, embody it. So I find that the embodiment of values is a lot more tangible than simply, what do you believe? That being said, I think talking about, let's talk about atheism for a second. I grew up in a kind of church that said basically that the only way that we could have any kind of moral foundation in the world was through belief in a higher power and a divinity. And so the kind of church that I grew up in honestly would say things like, well, if you're an atheist, you have no moral foundation, and so basically you have no reason not to go around murdering people if you're an atheist. That's the kind of religion I grew up in. And I've found that not to be the case at all. I've actually found that that people who don't require a higher power to have some sense of moral compassion and connection to their fellow human beings, to me, that shows that they find it from within themselves, and that it's more of evidence that we have this innate capacity for love and goodness. So I find atheists can be incredibly, moral and value-based people. I mean, personally, I think we all kind of operate on a continuum of what are we even talking about when we use these words anyway. Yeah. So it's kind of an abstract. But I would basically, to answer this person's question, I would say absolutely atheism is more than welcome here, because atheism can be a powerful way to live out love, period. And if you're someone who, as this question kind of touches on, who might feel confused of how do you interact with someone whose beliefs are maybe different from yours, let that be an interesting and exciting edge for you. What would that look like to find that common ground and connection? I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I would like to add something. One of the things that struck me when Jake and I started interacting, I feel like I kind of hammer home this thing, but you guys have values you share, you have priorities you share, you have a vision you share, and what is it? Love, period. And the thing that's interesting about love is you don't have to believe anything. I have never met anybody who doesn't believe in love or doesn't believe that love is powerful or that it exists. I don't think I've met anybody yet. And so, again, what happens with this whole God versus atheist thing is we're hung up in our heads and we're hung up in our definitions and our concepts. And somebody who doesn't call it the same thing as you or doesn't understand it to be the same thing as you can become your enemy, and you're going to kill them in a religious war? It seems like the most ridiculous thing. But we can find common ground in this idea that spirituality, in the sense of connection to something greater than ourselves, we can agree on that. We may not agree on what that something greater is, but the truth of the matter is that something greater transcends our concepts, our definitions, and our language. So it doesn't matter. The point is, can you experience it? And can you share in the experience with others? And I think that this community does that and has the potential of doing it even more, which is exciting. And that's why I'm really happy to align the Great Big Love chants with Aldea.
Wonderful. Thank you. I want to take a moment for us to just kind of slow down, because we covered a lot of different topics, a lot of ideas. Maybe you felt like a question wasn't answered fully for you, or at least like perhaps it felt unaligned with how you feel. Maybe you felt something felt edgy or sticky for you. And my encouragement would be, that is perfectly okay. In fact, I think that's great, because if you disagreed with something we said, that means that your values are becoming only more clear to you. So there's a lot of tabs open right now on the browser. There's a lot of different things, a lot of chapters, a lot of folds in our pages of our book, so to speak. And so I want to take a moment with just some stillness, and for us to just breathe together, take a few breaths. If you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes. And we just allow ourselves to be with the questions. We allow ourselves to be with that which might remain unresolved even now. We allow the various feelings and emotions that arise from a conversation that really ranges through all of the human experience, all different shades of what it means to be alive and to be spiritual beings. And as Victor reminded us, there really is nothing outside of this present moment, here and now. Everything outside of here and now is a concept. Tomorrow is a concept. Yesterday is a concept. So we just appreciate this moment and all it brings. All the things that are resolved and all the things that are unresolved. Just have gratitude to be here, to be in a community of people who are daring to ask the questions. And just have some gratitude for yourself, for the curiosity that drove you in your journey and brought you to this moment. With a final breath in and out. When you feel complete, you can open your eyes. So much gratitude for all of you, for your questions, for your participation. Also, can we give some gratitude to Victor? You were on stage for like 2 hours today. You really gave your all. I really appreciate you.